Welcome.
The Pathology Innovation Collaborative Community is a regulatory science initiative that aims to facilitate innovations in pathology, as well as advance safety and effectiveness evaluation. The PI Collaborative Community aims to harmonize approaches to speed delivery to patients through collaboration in the pre-competitive space. The PI-CC is open to all stakeholders, public or private, including but not limited to academia, industry, healthcare providers, patients, and advocacy groups. Meetings of this kind are an example of lawful activity under federal antitrust law, because the focus of the meeting is on government action or policy, including the industry's responses or positions taken with respect thereto. However, antitrust monitoring is needed for companies' own protection, since they are direct competitors meeting together. These meetings need to stay within protected subject matters and need to be monitored so that they do not stray off into inappropriate areas, such as pricing and price terms, sales and service territories for particular products, customers and customer territories, each company's individual decisions regarding selection of suppliers or customers, marketing plans and especially future marketing plans or new product offerings, other proprietary or competitively sensitive information. Today's meeting will follow the written agenda, and there will be no discussion of pricing or other prohibited topics. If the discussion veers into those topics, we will terminate the discussion. If you have any questions or concerns about the propriety of a discussion, please raise it immediately, and we will take a break to determine how best to proceed. The Medical Device Innovation Consortium acts as the formal convener, and we will follow their conflict of interest policy. For additional information, we defer to our Code of Conduct and our website, www.pathologyinnovationcc.org. We look forward to moving the field forward.
All right, so here is the slide deck, and Emma, maybe we can toggle back and forth when it comes to like some of these tumor settings,
Yeah.
just so we have that like on display, etc. So we have a database update, some time trends, and then the selected tumor settings, and then some of the results. So I think NASA data is still pending, right?
Yeah. I can get like the bare minimum of kind of the same database comparison as we have for NPCR and SEER. This kind of like 2001 to 2015. If we're just looking at what's microscopic, what's non-microscopic, and what's unknown, but I cannot get any kind of more specificity than that, given their stringencies about the orphan rule.
So, but you could get this, basically this layer, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, we could just add that for now. Then we have this at least, let's say, finalized, in lack of a better term, for NACER. And I mean, this is the number that we're mostly interested in, right?
Let me see. Yeah, I don't have it off the top
No,
right
no, no. I
now.
meant just like you can do it
But
offline.
yeah,
That's
we
fine.
can add this level, but I don't have anything past that.
So in other words, here is the microscopic trend hovers around 94,
Mhm.
and in terms of heme malignancies around 90%, with a slight increase here, probably due to immunohistochemistry. And while this looks large on this graph, of course, in reality, there's 88 more rows below here. So the question is just, of course, these are millions of patients, as illustrated in the prior slide deck. So the question was, can we see some uptick in other technologies? And the garden data that we received or pulled illustrate, at least by their raw numbers over different quarters, at least a certain increase in utilization. Whether this is follow-up testing, or whether some of these are multiple or derived from multiple samples from the same patient, we don't know. But we're just trying to illustrate adoption of a technology. So I think, as you no, we reached out to several other cell-free companies whether we could get similar data, and we could also look at the commercial sources to just discuss that. Now, that uptick in, let's say, correlation with this trend and the different databases is, of course, sort of implying that that may be good to track it. So related to the time trends, I think the tableaus from Ahmad are extremely helpful here. So we pulled this up again. I see he's just joining. That's awesome. So, like in other words, for some of these, positive histology, um, we have these percentages also for, I think this was the one for NPCR. And if I recall correctly, this was the percent microscopic for the various different, and I think the NASER was here. So you have those numbers at least, right? So we can take it from this database, right?
Yes.
So we know already that, while we have to take the numbers and do it properly, we know that this is also, effectively, despite the different or the various different resources, it's roughly speaking 94% or 93 point something. So that's definitely going to be helpful. So I don't know, Ahmad is probably in the train again and hopping on and off, but um, I hope that we can use this. It's publicly available and he has built it, so that would be great. And I believe that this here is sort of like for the different subsets of tumors, and the different trends here would be reflected in, I don't know, the percentage here of diagnosis anyway. So with those resources, we have the time trends and then the fraction of microscopy. So that would be, I don't know, these would be roughly speaking the two or three, if we count solid heme and cell-free, the time trends that we will portray. Hey, Ahmed. All right, so tumor settings. Oh yeah, he just texted he has bad internet on the train. All right, so the tumor settings that we discussed and, went back to some of the recordings as well as, so basically this would be the two subsets. So I think the idea with prostate cancer would be that some of those are affecting the bone, some of those may be identified initially by PSA. So that was one of the settings. Then, of course, in non-small cell lung cancer, there are a lot of different genotypes that have not been yet classified, meaning there's, it's implied that, under non-small cell lung cancer, there's an ALK subgroup. Then breast cancer, kind of the same thing. It's very common, often recurrent diagnosis, but also identification. Retinoblastoma is an example that is not always histologically sampled, and the points that we made last time to discuss sort of the possible, let's call it like miscoding of events just for various reasons. And then, I looked into our data again, and the malignant placental trophoblastic tumor is one that is primarily identified using serology. And then I thought the glioma, which has, for example, an IDH mutant or an IDH wild type setting, may be a great example to use sort of like how an ICD classification helps with encoding, because this, of course, implies that genotyping was performed. So I thought maybe we can look, Emma, if you could pull up the malignant placental trophoblastic tumor just to go sort of exemplarily through this, what we can gather from the percentages, or if we can.
Yes, and then keep that solid. So here is just all of the cancers under 93% trophoblastic tumor, but we're looking for placental site.
There it is.
Here it is, 44. It's working 75% diagnosed microscopically, 25% diagnosed non-microscopically. And it's all either in primary diagnosis X1, which is positive histology, or X7, or no, I'm sorry about that, X8 actually, which is non-classified, non-microscopic, non-classified.
So, I mean, this may require a little bit of discussion to say, like, so this is not X9, correct?
Yeah.
So do we have the table? Do you have the table for those specific classifications? So, you know, this tumor is typically identified using serology and probably some ultrasound, etc.
Excuse the mess of my desktop, but here is all of the classification methods. So yeah, X8 clinical diagnosis only. It's either all clinical diagnosis or positive histology for placental site trophoblastic.
So that code 8 is actually excluding a positive lab test, excluding direct visualization, and excluding radiology or imaging findings. So I thought that that was very interesting to look at, to say that 25% of this tumor were actually diagnosed, like, let's call it, by clinical diagnosis, which is, you know, if you look at the other trophoblastic tumor, that was more evenly split by serology, meaning a positive lab test, right, which is X5.
Yes, 7.1%.
And then 7%, which would be radiology. So that is probably sonography in this case. And then with the combination of both, then most will be diagnosed microscopically. So I thought that that was an interesting, I don't know, example. The other one is that I had is glioma. So if you
glioma malignant. That's right up here. Just zoom in a little bit.
So, of course, many of the gliomas will have to be biopsied, and if you can't biopsy them, then they're basically diagnosed by radiology. So what I thought is very interesting that at the, you know, at least this is for SEER, of course, 50%, meaning half of all, are diagnosed using X7, which is radiology, right?
Yes.
So that part is in contrast to brain, because I know, you know, Ahmad, I see your hand raised. Go ahead. Ahmad, you there? Yeah, so I think the...
May I say something?
Yeah, of course, of course.
I hope it is hearable because the train is actually has very bad internet. This list includes the ICD-03 row coding, so it does not include the site of the tumor. The issue here, like in the glioma, it includes all the gliomas in the body, so it does not separate between the optic nerve gliomas or the cerebropontine angle gliomas or cortical gliomas anywhere. So it packs all the gliomas that can happen anywhere in the nervous system. This is a limitation in this list. Okay. this is just a concern. So I would suggest using one of the bigger or the higher level classifications. Okay.
Mm-hmm. So when looking at, you know, the higher level classification, for example, brain, other nervous system, right, which is probably summarizing many of those, we know that the microscopic percentage is again in the 90% range, and I think your plots show that actually quite nicely. So I think you had provided that data even across the years. You know, in other words, also when looking at eye and orbit, I think you separated that out distinctly as well. That went actually down over time. So the microscopic diagnosis. But I thought, just like as an example, I mean, you can call it a limitation, but you can also call it like an outlier or something specific. I think, you know, the one layer below, the subependymal giant cell astrocytoma, we could also pick that where it's also 50-50, right? Those that can be biopsied will be histologically, and those that cannot will likely be diagnosed by imaging. I don't know which one we're picking is up to discussion, right? Because some of those, I would say, radiology heavy diagnoses, at least by what was picked for the diagnostic modality, was just sort of more the aim that we would discuss that. All right, so if we move on to the hematologic malignancies, I think one of those that we discussed last time was the Waldenström's macroglobulinemia. So that was...
I apologize. Let me just see if I can delete that, make this a little bit prettier. Here you go.
Mm-hmm. So I thought that the interesting thing here is that there's, of course, you know, a lot of X3, which is immunophenotyping and genetics, but that the positive lab test, which is X5, or, you know, I don't know, code 5, is only a small fraction. I think we discussed that last time, but I thought that that is something to note. When looking at the other, let's call it, categories here, or ICD-O codes, I didn't find a good example other than the malignant lymphoma that had a high fraction of radiologic diagnosis. So I don't know quite how to explain that. So it may be, you know, some of the malignant lymphomas, again, what Ahmed said, we don't have the site. So it may be that a subset of the primary CNS lymphomas would probably likely be diagnosed with imaging only. And I think in one of the Tableau sheets, there was a subset of lymphoma, and that was interestingly very high. But that is probably because most lymphomas are diagnosed not by radiology. Don't know, any comments on that? Okay. So, as an additional feature, can you search for the PDGFRA? I think there was one with PDGFRA rearrangement in the heme subset.
Maybe. Are you talking about the myeloid, this top one, or?
Yep. Yeah, myeloid neoplasm with PDGFRA rearrangement. So again, a larger fraction of, you know, diagnostic code 3, which is I think, with immunophenotyping and genetic studies. So implied because you would need a rearrangement code or a rearrangement test or result to call it that. And there are a few others, of course, the BCR-ABL, etc. So many of these, let's call it molecularly or more molecularly defined subsets had this increase of, like X3. Similarly, in your Excel spreadsheet, the rows 27 through, they all have these translocation attached to their name. So similar to what we discussed with glioma here, if the diagnosis is entailing a specific genetic change, it would imply that that test has been done. While it's not necessarily specified, I mean, of course not in the diagnostic modality, but that I thought would be something to point out. I'm not sure if we want to focus on one specific here or whether it's more of a range here. Any comments on that? All right. Then I think the other tumor that I wanted to briefly review is called primary effusion lymphoma.
It's when you can spell things correctly. Or it's just right here. That works too.
So here I thought it was very interesting that, of course, as an effusion, it's defined that it has to be in, for example, a pleural or peritoneal fluid. So that is noteworthy because while it is microscopic, most of it is actually diagnosed using cytology. And, that was just something noteworthy because if you look across the other heme malignancy, there's, a heavy chain disease and some others that has a slightly higher rate, but nothing quite as high as the primary effusion lymphoma. So that would be, definitely helpful to point out. And I had the CLL, which is your row 7. So chronic lymphocytic leukemia / lymphoma with a relatively, I don't know, not a 50-50 split, but there's definitely some subset of cases that are not using, adjunct, let's call it immunohistochemistry and or genetic studies. But that's a rather common scenario. So similar to prostate and breast, I think CLL is a very common disease. So that would be helpful as well to show and or discuss. Okay, so Ahmad, we were thinking of possibly portraying some of these as a heat map, or just showing some of these as like fractions. I don't know if you have input on that. Maybe another tunnel. Ahmad, go ahead.
So actually, this inspired me to think about the adjustment of the agent 6 when comparing the tumors to each other. So maybe like using stick regression and with the outcome as a reaching or using the histopathology, yes or no, as an outcome. Okay, so because some of the tumors also maybe not biopsied due to the age of the patient, um, uh, or maybe because of the very old age, and the patient will refuse doing anything due to old age. I experience this frequently with 80 years or more, and says, okay, I don't expect to live more than what I already done, so don't do anything. So maybe this is something that we can consider doing either here or in the future.
I mean, I think a plot on that would be actually quite informative to, I mean, I'm just thinking of, some of the, early days of COVID, people ask, is this more common in males and females? Is this, kind of like, I don't know, an age distribution and or gender sex distribution? I have a specific plot in mind that we made at some point, where it looked kind of like a population plot where, right or left is the male versus female, and then the vertical axis is Emma, can you stop sharing so I can share?
This can be interesting also, yeah.
So this was, of course, has nothing to do with histology right now, but this was more, so there was also PCR positive or negative, but just assume that this is, male versus female, and then age. So if we plot basically the fraction of histologic diagnosis over age and by gender, that may be actually really interesting to see. The other part that we discussed last time, and we haven't gotten to it yet, is of course to separate the fraction of histologic diagnosis by the 6 acknowledged races, meaning the ancestral analysis. I'm not sure whether we can do this also by age and sex. That would be, of course, very complicated graph, or at least maybe a heat map or so. But just to consider that, the power of the SEER database is acknowledged, and, to account for, are all, let's say, minorities, cancers also diagnosed in the same fraction. But I like the idea of age and sex, because that would be very interesting for specific tumors as well. But maybe for this project it may be most interesting to portray it for all, because we just mainly want the overall sort of, let's say, fraction of microscopic diagnosis. But I like it. It's a really good idea, Ahmed.
Thank you.
Yeah, so in terms of figures, I think we thought maybe, for a journal, it's probably good to have, sort of a flow diagram, where the data come from. I mean, not where territorially, but more that, from a patient and a microscope to the hospital. I think we had a simplified graph, and then some sort of distribution of those 9 modalities versus the ICD-10 codes, just to point out some of the differences, and then probably some of the time trends, possibly, a cell-free DNA or some other new diagnostic modality, probably as an independent graph, just to show that over the same time some adoption happened. So we hope that we can get, some interests from other companies, or to contribute some of their data, probably annualized, maybe find that also in business reports or in, overall commercial or marketing material. And then I think an age sex plot and a minority plot, that would be great to include as well, to just show that there's like a slightly different layer to it as well. Ahmad, would it be okay if we include your Tableau links in the manuscript? I mean, of course, you'd be an author, but would that be okay? May take a moment until he's back out of the tunnel. So those 4 links we have, right, Emma? Yeah.
Yes.
So maybe the age, sex. Do you have that data for all these? Let's say for the solid tumors.
I've never pulled that data, but I can run the same query and it's just check 2 more columns.
Yeah, and I don't know what the ancestral panel or ancestral data field will look like, but that may be helpful. Do you have that the data model website from the GitHub?
Yes. Let me just figure out on which of my many, many, many tabs is it on. Sorry, 2 seconds. Let me make sure. Yeah, so this is kind of what we were looking at earlier from Kansas City Medical Center. All this gives is the different fields available. So if we're interested in, let me see, I've looked at quite a few.
Item 170?
Yes, so 170 gives your race recode. And then here's the value coding system.
So it's probably a mixture of 170 and 171, right? Those 2 items.
Also, I'm not quite sure which, this doesn't, I don't think this GitHub is necessarily as updated as some of the more recent databases that have come out for SEER, because they have worked a lot in looking at like the recoding for different races. So I think that we can get this to be, we're not going to need to like combine anything, that we can just get a better idea of race just from one variable. It's just off the top of my head, I'm not positive as to what the name of that variable is. And there's an age recode that works, that will be easy to grab as well as, and we're just talking age at the age of diagnosis, correct?
Yes. Yeah, so age of diagnosis is 1, and then one of those integrated racial code. I don't know what the best or the most acknowledged NASER item is for race, but 170, 171 comes to mind. But there's I think it's chapter X or something, where a lot of the NASER fields are combined for, I think there's also a Hispanic and non-Hispanic item. Those are usually the fields that are looked for.
Yeah. There is. Yes.
Emma, are you on the train too?
Well, I'll pull those out. What are we doing?
Now Emma is in the tunnel.
If we're not Hispanic.
This is funny. We must be very close to a discovery.
Little
Hello. I think Ahmed is asking for a Zoom call-in.
Yeah, I'm pulling that one now. Just takes a moment.
Perfect. Yeah, I mean, we can also connect offline with Ahmed, but I think the key item to know, we can email Ahmed to find which one is the best to pull, which one is the most acknowledged, and then the other element is, of course, for the age. I believe the binning by 10-year increments, to have like those, that makes it a lot easier and usually is finely granular enough. If someone wants it more granular, they can use the online supplement. So I believe as next steps, we have to put the supplement together, which is the instruction file and the supplemental XLS file with all the different, let's call it, primary data components that we use to generate the figures. Then we have the figure file and then the document. I know you started writing the results section methods, I think we have. So then we would have 4 files. So the supplemental document for instruction of how to pull the data, the Excel file with all the supplemental tabs, ideally in the order that they appear in text, a figure file, which is a PowerPoint, which we can share as PNGs to make it a little bit easier via email, and then the doc file, which is the main document for, writing and editing. We can consider putting that on a Google Docs or something, just that multiple people can edit. But I find that if that's sitting somewhere, it usually also means that there's no deadline, right? Means like, yeah, whenever I get to it, I edit in Google Docs. So I think an email works better with like, hey, let's provide feedback, over the next 10 days or something. And so I think that would be the next items. We should probably schedule one other meeting, ideally in combination with the cell-free group, so that we can say what data they may have, or whether when we find something, what we would like to add. Ahmed, are you hearing us? Better now?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so this is now through the telephone.
Awesome. Thank you. Ahmed, we had the question about which of the racial NACER items is sort of the most acknowledged one, because there are many different, right? Is there one that you prefer, or?
I use the one of the least groups, least number of groups, which is it should be the one with the white, black, and ABI, which means Asia Pacific indigenous or indigenous groups. I think so.
Mm-hmm.
So it includes the least number of groups inside it.
Mm-hmm.
Because otherwise you will and the fourth one, I think it is the unknown, because in some of the tumors you will find very few number of patients, so it will be meaningless to use the ones with very specified and small groups and very many number of many groups. Sorry.
Yeah, and I mean, I read an a brief summary recently about that if someone is multiracial, individual patients have multiple codes for the race item, right? So let's say someone is, Pacific Asian and black, then it would be race 2 and 5. And then I wasn't quite sure how that's accounted for, but I think taking the white, black, and then American Indian and like the 3-tiered may be helpful to do this. But I know it's like 50 or so. Ola, can you mute? So there's like 50 different, race codes. Of course, the numbers go below 16 again.
Are we interested in the Hispanic versus non-Hispanic breakdown as well? I'll just pull it just in case, right?
Yeah, we can take a look at that. Okay. The points. Okay. Cool. Then, Ahmad, did you have other comments?
I have just tried the racial disparities software of the sorry, not the racial, the health disparities software of the SEER over the weekend. It worked very nice. So it should work smoothly if you tried it. I have built some experience over the weekend.
Oh, nice. And Emma, did you find that, what Ahmed mentioned?
Yes, I have found it. I haven't had time, to be honest, to play with it yet, but I have downloaded it, and so that's on the to-do list as well.
Okay.
Yeah, the website has also 2 videos to help you, and I think if you face any problems also with the software or the interpretation, you can send to Steve Scoper, is the one responsible for it. So if you faced anything, search for his email address. In case of, I think it will be easy if you contact him directly if you face any problems. He is very cooperative. I mean, with any questions. It's called Steve Scoper.
Awesome, thank you.
Perfect. All right, so then we send out an email as soon as we have the next meeting, once we have all the files ready, but I think beforehand we share the files with everyone for comments, so we have figures, etc. to look at. And then, yeah, I hope to hear or see you next time. All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.